Good morning and welcome to the Editor's Podcast for the Journal of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. I am Dr. Linda Snutzel, our Editor-in-Chief of the journal. And today this podcast will focus on an article in the journal titled Temporal Patterns of Diet and Physical Activity and of Diet Alone Have More Numerous Relationships with Health and Disease Status Indicators compared to temporal patterns of physical activity alone. And today with me, I have Dr. Heather Eicher Miller, who is professor in the Department of Nutrition Science at Purdue University. Welcome, Heather.
Hi, well, thank you so much. It's great to be here.
So to highlight the article that you published, I'm going to be welcoming your thoughts on some of the questions related to temporal patterns of diet and physical activity. And I wanted to begin because I know that your research was funded by the National Cancer Institute of the National Institutes of Health. And that funding was through a very prestigious R21 award. I review for NIH, so I know how prestigious that award is. And what are some of your original aims and associated hypotheses in that NCI proposal that actually led to this published research?
One of the overarching goals we were really trying to address with this project was integrating more multidimensionality of behaviors and see how that can perhaps have a more powerful link with health outcomes. And so in order to do that, some of our goals were to kind of first focus on individual behaviors like diet and physical activity and create new methods that could take into account many of the different dimensions of each of those behaviors separately, and then see what their relationship with kind of a panel of health outcomes looked like. And then if we could do that successfully, then we wanted to take those patterning methods that we created and put them together and try to see if putting those multiple dimensions of multiple behaviors together could have even stronger and closer relationships with health outcomes. And that was really what we did in this paper. It was really the culmination of the entire project, and finding out that we did indeed see that putting the dietary and physical activity patterns together had a stronger relationship with health outcomes compared with just physical activity patterns by themselves. But also the dietary patterns had similarly strong relationships with health outcomes.
Such an important topic. What are some of the important aspects of temporal patterns as we look at lifestyle factors involving diet and physical activity? Why are we focusing on this? Why is it so important?
So we really felt that, when we look at the literature that's been published, we've made a lot of great strides in thinking about the important aspects of diet and physical activity that are related to health, but we've still kind of siloed those important aspects. So, we look at total energy, we look at certain foods, and even diet quality. It's more diet quality over an entire day, perhaps, or a certain period of time. And in none of that have we addressed the timing very well. But, for all of us, we have, different routines in our day when we're being active or we're eating. And we thought that, that stream of time is really what's connecting all these behaviors together. And we need to think of ways to find out if that's important and better be able to test these temporal patterns that we exhibit daily with regard to diet and physical activity. So that's what we were trying to capture with creating some new methods to be able to integrate timing into patterns.
Yes, very novel and also incredibly important. What is the significance of this research topic relative to health and disease?
Creating these patterns is one small step towards trying to harness all of this multidimensionality that we have in the behaviors that we take on in our life, and trying to pull all of those things together. Like, we know it's also more than just our behaviors. It's like our genetics, it's our socioeconomics, it's all these external factors that as well that can influence our health. And behaviors are shaped by those factors too. So, what would be great is ultimately in the future if we could create some ways to incorporate all of those factors that influence health together. And so we hope that this research that we've done is part of the move towards that. It's one step in the direction of trying to incorporate all of the different behavioral things that we engage in that relate to our health.
Yes, so having sort of temporal kinds of characteristics to add to what we know about positive aspects of things going on relative to health and diseases is a wonderful direction to go in. What are some of the takeaway messages from your research where you've made a distinction, a very clear distinction between diet and physical activity relative to timing?
In this paper, we found that the adults, like we focused on adults with the pattern of dietary intake throughout the day that was more moderate. So, meaning they were consuming relatively equivalent proportion of energy at each time that they ate throughout the day. So having that moderate, more what we're calling a more moderate pattern was linked with lower BMI, waist circumference, and odds of obesity compared with adults in these other temporal patterns of diet who were, having more extremes, like maybe a really larger evening meal compared to any other energy intake in the day, or on the other hand, much more energy in the mornings compared to any other times. And that was really true whether we looked at just diet alone, the temporal pattern of diet alone, or when we looked at the pattern of diet and physical activity together. So that story was pretty clear. But when we looked at physical activity, we kind of found more complexity that we just, I think, need more research to really figure out. One of the things we found that when we looked at physical activity, when it was jointly patterned with diet, the group that had the lowest obesity related indicators was the group where they had lower physical activity from about 10 to 6 p.m. But when we looked at the physical activity patterns alone, the group with the lowest obesity related indicators was the group with the highest physical activity counts from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. So I think this is just one angle of looking at these patterns. And we really need to dig a little bit more, I think, to untangle their meaning. And again, we're also looking just cross sectionally. So we don't really know anything about how we could change these over time, and what that means. It's good because it gives us more questions to keep pursuing in the future.
Yes, and that's so important. And we certainly need to start with observational studies before we move on to the very expensive randomized clinical trial study design. So wonderful summary, thank you. And then finally, how might the practicing RDN use this information in a clinical or other type of setting where nutrition counseling is going on?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that because I do just want to kind of temper our results by saying I think that the outcomes we saw should really be viewed as kind of a wait and see what happens next in research, premise, because this was cross-sectional and we were trying to do something novel by making the methods to create these patterns, but I do think that, the finding we got with diet and how we saw the moderate pattern was linked with the best health outcomes. I think that really does kind of support some of our current dietary guidelines of thinking about moderation, thinking about how you're just like eating throughout a day and keeping patterns routine perhaps, and that moderation approach. But I do, expect and hope that we can build more from this in the future, potentially use these methods to incorporate, as I mentioned, more dimensionality and use, like, we have so much personal monitoring going on with our phones these days and apps that can track all the behaviors we do, our heart rates, perhaps other health indicators. So we want to be able to harness all that data for our own good and potentially expand these methods to incorporate more of those aspects and, maybe create better ways for physicians to and dietitians to monitor the behaviors of their patients or their health. So I think that's where the direction that this research could take. But as far as the results, I think we just have to kind of create better studies that build from this. So
Mhm.
perhaps no direct applications there.
Yes, thank you so much, because I think it's important to put those cross-sectional studies in perspective. And you did a very nice job of summarizing that. And we just need more research like yours leading up to what we might eventually have, where we're doing some experimental studies with control groups and intervention groups. So thank you so much for that. And I also wanted to say again a thank you for being a part of the podcast today. And I know that what you presented will provide new insights in this very exciting area. And it's just so important that you've done some work where we've looked at both physical activity and diet, and separating those out, I think, was incredibly important as you did your research. So thank you so much for responding to my questions. And I appreciate the time that you devoted to the podcast. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I just really love being here and talking with you. And I always appreciate JAND. I think it's a wonderful journal and just, love reading it, love seeing other investigators' results there. And I always feel honored to be published in JAND. So thank you so much.
And thank you.